Okay, this might be a little tricky, but I'm gonna watch the admit waiting room and try to give a little introduction here. So let's get started. And as people trickle in, they can join us when they're ready. We have started the recording as well. So good afternoon, everyone, and welcome to our Lunch and Learn webinar. Thank you so much for spending part of your day with us. My name is Gregory Stevens, and I'm the Northern California Director at California Interfaith Power and Light. Our mission here is to inspire and mobilize people of faith and conscience to take bold and just action on climate change. And honestly, there's no more urgent time than now to do this sacred work together. Before I introduce our guest speaker today, though, I want to share a couple ways you can plug into the work we're doing here at CIPL. You can find all of this information at interfaithpower.org, and I'll put that information in the chat as well. But the first program I want to lift up is Our Sacred Canopy. Through this initiative, we're planting trees across California to build up a strong, healthy tree canopies in neighborhoods that have historically been denied the many benefits that trees provide. And it's funny that saying this sounds like we already all know this, but it's a helpful reminder. Trees are a powerful climate solution. They absorb carbon dioxide from the atmosphere, helping to slow climate change. They regulate the water cycle, prevent erosion, and reduce the risk of flooding and drought. Trees also cool communities, improve air quality, and provide shelter for countless other species, protecting biodiversity and supporting all living creatures. So help us by planting our sacred canopy across California. The second program is specific to congregations in Alameda County and San Joaquin County. In partnership with Ava Community Energy, we're looking for congregations to install electric vehicle charging stations and build out the infrastructure for electric vehicles through our very own faith communities. Did you know that the Bay Area has the sixth worst air quality in the country? In response, one of the most powerful ways we can take action is by advancing clean transportation that reduces pollution and safeguards the air we breathe. So please reach out if this sparks your interest. With that, let me introduce our guest speaker, Sharon Delgado. Sharon is a retired United Methodist pastor, activist, and author of several books. Living in the woods outside Nevada City, just admitted someone. Welcome, Debbie. She is the convener of the fossil-free United Methodist Church, which advocates for the United Methodist Church to divest from fossil fuels. She is on the coordinating committee of the United Methodist Creation Justice Movement. She has been preaching, teaching, and offering slideshows about climate justice for over 30 years. Today, she will be speaking about the revised edition of her book, Love in a Time of Climate Change, Honoring Creation, Establishing Justice, which was just released yesterday. So please drop your questions in the chat, or you can send them to me directly, and we can finish out with the Q&A, question and response time. But from there, take it away, Sharon.
Thank you so much, Gregory. I really appreciate you hosting this, and I'm really happy that everyone is here to learn about this updated version of my book, Love in a Time of Climate Change. The first edition was published in 2017, so that's 9 years ago, and that's a lot's gone on in 9 years related to climate change, related to the context in which we're dealing with the climate crisis, and conversations around climate change have evolved. So it got a lot of traction when it was published, and this edition updates the science. It expands the current conversations and the conversations that were taking place long ago, but also new conversations that have come up. It surveys today's growing movement for climate justice. It offers suggestions for action. And it also talks about how to integrate concerns and action about climate and concerns and action for climate justice into our faith journey. That's kind of the overarching purpose of this book, because that's how I deal with some of the feelings, some of the realities that we are facing in these days. And I want to start by reading from the book. It just was released yesterday, so I call this not lunch and lunch. Let's see, whatever it is, but I call it lunch and launch because today is my book launch, a book launch. I have several presentations scheduled, but it was just released yesterday. I have a few advanced copies. So I'm going to start by just reading from the new preface. It's a new preface for the new edition. I'm just going to start with a paragraph or so. At this time in history, when the stability of life on Earth is being disrupted by rapidly advancing climate change, we human beings face an unprecedented challenge. The challenge is whether to turn away or face and respond to the dangers of planetary warming, knowing that our choices will affect all future generations. Those of us who benefit from industrial civilization also carry the moral burden of knowing that our fossil-fueled way of life is harming people here and now and diminishing God's good creation. But living in this time can also be seen as an opportunity and a privilege. Years ago, after participating in a nonviolent direct action, a young woman who had been at the action sent a card to me, and she signed her note with these words: "I am so grateful that we are alive at this time when the earth needs us most." This book stresses that this is the time when we need to take action. And in fact, the scientists have said that it's in this decade that change must come. Love in a time of climate change is based on Jesus's teachings to love God above all and to love our neighbors as ourselves. And its premise is that in this time of climate change, loving God has to include caring for, honoring, protecting creation. Because creation is a reflection of God. Creation is how we are nurtured as beings on this earth. And it is creation is who we are. We are an interconnected, interrelated, interdependent part of God's creation. And in this time of climate change, loving our neighbors can't just mean caring for and reaching out in mercy to our neighbors who live next door or down the street or in our own community even, although we must do that. And we've been seeing that well on the news, how sometimes it's very challenging and scary, but we have to do what we can in our local areas, both for climate and for just to prevent cruelty or to be present when those things are happening and to care for our neighbors. But that's the way that we can love our neighbors besides reaching out in mercy is by taking a stand for justice, because it is through justice, and in this case I'm speaking about climate justice, through which we seek to establish well-being for our neighbors near and far, our neighbors human and non-human, and our neighbors present and future. So this book is about, the book is also informed by the teachings of John Wesley. And John Wesley is the founder of Methodism. It might sound a little abstract that we're talking about somebody who lived in the 18th century. But I'm going to explain to you how it's relevant today, how I've been influenced by the teachings of John Wesley, who said, genuine religion is heart religion because it's no other than love. So this book is about how to live in love in this time of climate change. That's kind of the overview of what the book's about. I'm going to share about the book first in this first part of the presentation. I'm going to share about the book and the different influences that are in the book and what it's about. But it's going to be in the context of my experience through the years, and how I came to be concerned about these issues, and how I came to go out and speak and write, and came to write this book, because I think it'll be more interesting than just starting with kind of an overview of the book, which I just gave you a nice short version. And then after I talk about that, I'm going to fast forward and talk about where we are today with climate change. And I'm going to give you do a PowerPoint, but it's going to be short because I'm not going to go through the whole thing. I'm going to stop after I've kind of given an overview of climate change, and I have more that I can present as well about climate justice and some of the things that are holding us back and some of the things that are bringing hope. And I may get to that, but otherwise, we're going to have Q&A, and then I am going to talk about how this book helps readers approach climate change in a way that, and some takeaways from the book. And that way we'll have some additional time for Q&A. And if we want, we can go back and pick up some of the other topics in the PowerPoint. So the way that I got involved and started working on these issues was way back in the 1980s, when my hometown of Oroville, California, which is about an hour and 15 minutes away from where I live now in outside of Nevada City, California, there was a big fire at a chemical plant there. And the fire caused a huge amount of damage. It polluted all the farms in the area. It was a farming community there, and it was mostly Black farms. And my mother lived there still. I didn't, but I traveled to be with her at an EPA hearing about it. And so I started learning more about it. And, the farms were so badly polluted that people were getting sick. People were having to move away. People couldn't sell their meat, their eggs, their produce. The groundwater was polluted, and the aquifer had a plume of toxic chemicals that was traveling. And it was a Superfund site, and it is still a Superfund site today. So that's when I started getting involved in environmental issues and environmental justice and environmental racism. And so I came into concerns for creation that way. And I'd always loved creation. I was a country girl. I grew up in the country. I live in the country now. And so it really hit me hard. And I dealt with the issues and the feelings, particularly the feelings, but through incorporating them into my faith journey, into my practice of prayer, my other spiritual practices. And then it was just at that time that I was ready to start seminary. And I had just read Bill McKibben's book, The End of Nature, which also hit me hard. And when I entered seminary, in addition to my Master of Divinity degree to become a pastor, I also was enrolled in a master's program that focused on environmental ethics. And so that was part of my history. But it was in seminary that helped me develop the framework for looking at these things from a spiritual perspective, a moral perspective for sure, but also a spiritual perspective, a perspective that I express in this book as a way that we need to go deep within ourselves. We need to reach into our faith resources. The alternative is to avoid, because it's very painful to look at these things. So, and in seminary, that really helped me develop the framework for this book, the framework through which I experience and process and make decisions for action. And that's what I am expressing to you, well, in this presentation, but in the book. So in seminary is where I started realizing how relevant John Wesley's teachings, but also his role as a social reformer and his process of discernment, how valuable that was for us for today. And I already knew about his teachings on social holiness and his role as a social reformer. So I was already aware of that. And that was part of what drew me to the United Methodist Church in the first place. But it was in seminary that I discovered his remarkable creation theology. His teachings on social holiness and his role as a social reformer kind of correspond to liberation theologies of today, or at least complement. And some liberation theologians do see the parallels between Wesley and the work that they're doing. Same with the creation theology. A lot of process theologians see parallels between their theology and Wesley. And in fact, a lot of process theologians are United Methodist or have another Wesleyan heritage, a Nazarene, for instance. So, because Wesley teaches not so much about God as transcendent, and I realize that not everyone here is Christian. So, but there's but God, Wesley actually calls God the soul of the universe. So some people might say God, but there is something going on beyond what we can see and touch and feel with our regular senses. There's something else going on. And so I just want to acknowledge that some of the theology that I'm talking about is going to, take what you can use and leave the rest from John Wesley, put it that way, and from me. But he talks about creation as revealing God. He wasn't afraid of the science of his time. In fact, he wrote what is called a compendium of natural theology, natural philosophy, and it was called A Survey of the Wisdom of God in Creation. And how he did it is he pieced together things from the scientists of his day, the people who were evidence-based, and then some of it going back, there are things that, of course, we know now weren't true. But he tied all those scientific articles together with theological commentary, and talked about how the natural world reveals the wonder and the glory and the power and the amazing aspects of God, and induces awe. And so he recognized that as, and he talked about that God is not just transcendent, as I said, but immanent within creation, a power within creation that is tangible, that you can experience. And he called that God's omnipresence. And then he talked about the redemption of the universe. And he talked about grace and how grace is available, as he put it, even to brute beasts. God's grace includes all of creation. And then, yes, God is the soul of the universe. So these aspects of his creation theology did impact me, and I've drawn from those insights and from a lot of others. And at least as important to me was his process of discernment, because that's what I have adapted for this book. The process of discernment, it's come to be called the Wesleyan quadrilateral because it has 4 sources of authority: scripture, tradition, reason, and experience. They're sources of authority, And by looking at things through these different lenses, and that's what I do in this book, is through these different lenses of scripture, tradition, reason, and experience, I talk about climate change, I talk about creation, I talk about justice. And by looking at these things from different perspectives, it expands the whole way of seeing it. And it expands the conversation, essentially. And yeah, so that's the process through which I have developed this book. And it's a process that I want to share because it is a way to integrate personal spirituality with concern for climate justice and climate action. What else? Okay, so after seminary and after being ordained, I was part of the United Methodist delegation to uh, to to Rio de Janeiro during the United Nations Conference on Environment and Development, which was in Rio de Janeiro in 1992. And that was when all the people are people from all the countries. I think there was one that didn't come, one nation that wasn't there, but they came together for the first time to deal with environmental issues. The first, basically, climate conference. They signed several agreements, but the primary one was the Framework Convention on Climate Change, which is the foundational treaty of all of the other COPs, all of the other climate conferences that we've had. And so that's the primary treaty. And it was a very hopeful time. And it was that from that time on that I began speaking and writing and working with my denomination, but also with the National Council of Churches and others. I've developed a handbook for churches on environmental issues and so on. So I've been at this from that point on. And so that's what I'm sharing a lot of kind of what brought me to this point. And all of my work represents and it expresses that history that I just shared with you and is apparent in the book. And now I want to fast forward and share my PowerPoint because I think it's really important for us to know today where we are with climate change because things are shifting fast and things have gotten hot really fast. Just about a week ago, Donald Trump took the action as much as he can, as much as he has power to do, which he's doing things that people might think that he doesn't have power to do. But he withdrew us from the Framework Convention on Climate Change, not just the Paris Accords, but way back from 1992. And believe it or not, he withdrew from a lot of other good global agreements, but he withdrew us as much as he can from the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, the scientific authority that is from all scientists from all the nations working together to come to consensus. So it's pretty conservative. So that's what he did. And no one's shocked. But nevertheless, we're still going on. And we need to still go on. So I'm going to share the screen with you. Okay. Here we go. And it's shared. So now what I have to do is get the slideshow started. And I'll go from the beginning. So this is just where we are. This is the book launch presentation. This is I'm giving you a presentation about my book. There it is. And that is the book, Love in a Time of Climate Change. That picture is from Santa Cruz, where I used to live. It's by an author who I know. And I like it because it also has the good parts of the rake and the plants and the bicycle. So the IPCC, the Intergovernmental Panel on Climate Change, is still doing its work. And it says the most recent report, climate change is widespread, rapid, and intensifying. And I am a climate presenter that was trained by Al Gore in Climate Reality back in 2012. So I have tons of pictures, and I'm not showing you all the disaster slides. I've just got hundreds because every time Al Gore goes to a different country, which is several times a year, I get all the slides. I have access to all the slides. So I get updated slides as I choose. Okay, in the past, first, Homo sapiens have been around about 200,000 years. In the past 800,000 years, CO2 emission, CO2 concentration in the atmosphere has never, in 800,000 years, gone above 300 parts per million. And temperatures have corresponded. We know this. The evidence is clear. But now we are all the way up at 400 parts per million. And that was 2013. We're above that now. And if we keep going at the current rate of emissions, in the 40 years, we're going to be at 600 parts per million. So that's where we are with the advance of climate change. As CO2 increases, so does the temperature. That's the famous hockey stick graph on the left, but and more varied on the right, but corresponding. And the hottest 10 years on record have been these years, including 2023, 2024, and now we can add 2025 to the top 11. The hottest year ever was 2023, 2024. 2023 and 2025 were close. They were bad. And you know what happens with with heat? As the heat rises, so do worldwide extreme weather catastrophes, which those of you who are here, I'm certainly have made the connection between the warming planet and weather extremes and disasters. Another thing about the heating planet and the all the disasters is the people who are harmed the most and are impacted most, first and worst, already and into the future, are the people who have contributed least to the greenhouse gas burden in the atmosphere. So as you can see at the top, you can see the top emitters with all the red. And then you can see those who contributed the least but will be most impacted. They're also in red tones. They're very vulnerable and they're experiencing it now. So are we, but they are worse. And so the IPCC also says it's now or never if we want to limit global warming to 1.5 degrees Celsius. And that would be 2.7 degrees Fahrenheit, which is a pretty high fever for an individual and evidently for the Earth. And in fact, in Paris in 2015, the nations of the world agreed to stay as close to 1.5 degrees as possible, because if you've got to stop somewhere, this rising temperatures. You want to stop the rising temperatures before all the feedback loops kick in and it just takes off on its own. And so the scientists were saying 1.5, the activists were saying 1.5. 2 degrees is the upper limit of the Paris Accords, but the 1.5 was where we were all headed and committed, and all the net zero by 2050 impacts, goals, I should say, all those net zero goals by net 50, they were all based on keeping the temperature no higher than 1.5 degrees Celsius. And if we would have slowed down emissions starting as we committed to, no, not as we committed to, as the scientists said back in 2015, that could have happened. But as the Financial Times headline today, I didn't have time to pull it off and put it on this slideshow, but said that we've blown past it for sure. And the scientists are saying that because James Hansen's most recent article, excerpt from his new book, makes that case. So here we are. 2025 is tied with 2023 for the second warmest year. That was at about 1.45 degrees Celsius. 2024 was 1.55 degrees Celsius, which means it surpassed 1.5 degrees, the limit. But right now what's happening is it's hovering. It's hovering at 1.5 degrees Celsius. So we haven't been able to reduce emissions in all this time. The largest source, as I said, is the burning of fossil fuels. I don't know, I've got something blocking the right-hand side here, my whatever Zoom is doing, but it's if you can see the far right, it's going up in a steeper way than it was at first, and it slowed down with the global pandemic. It's slowed down with the global financial crisis, but other than that, it's pretty steady. And that is reflecting both Democrats and Republicans. It's not just one administration or one party. And I really address that quite a bit in my book. So over half the CO2 now in the atmosphere has been emitted in the past 30 years. Since the dawn of the Industrial Revolution is quite a while back, but half of the emissions have been emitted in the past 30 years. Half of it has been. In other words, the amount of CO2 in the atmosphere more than doubled since the 1992 UN Conference on Environment and Development in Rio. So that means since we have known, since the international community has started cooperating together, making agreements together, and many of us have cut our carbon footprints in coordination with these efforts, it has more than doubled in 30 years. Why? And this is where, I know you are on the verge. This is where I'm going to leave you hanging until we come back to the slideshow, if we do. But I want to take a few minutes for Q&A, for comments at this point. Can you take it from there, Gregory, for that? Yeah. And then I'll go back.
Yes, hello. Zoom has always got a new feature, so excuse me if I do this wrong, but if you could throw in your questions in the chat or jump off camera and ask your question. And while we wait for some questions, I think that I would like to start by saying, what are some practical things that people of faith can do to help combat climate change?
Okay, and I'm happy to talk about that because I have suggestions throughout the book. There's probably 20 pages chock full of suggestions of every kind. But one of the things, and I'll make this case I make the case in the book, and I will make the case if we have a chance to go back to the slideshow. But it has to be more than just individual efforts to cut our carbon footprint. It's going to take joint action. As Bill McKibben says, if we can build a movement, then we have a chance. And fortunately, there's a movement. I mean, here we are. There's a movement that is global in scope, a movement that is working to, is calling for fossil fuels to be phased out. There's a lot of activism, and that's internationally. Um, there's and that's part of the value of the climate justice movement, of being a part of that and identifying with that. And each action we take, whether it's in our churches or in our homes or in our communities, if we write legislators, there's so many things we can do. But if every time we do something, we think, how is this contributing to the larger movement for climate justice? Because that's what we need to be about. We need to build a movement strong enough to change the cultural assumptions to and change the system that is driving climate change. And so if we think about that, for instance, if we put solar panels on our roof, that's a witness to the community. And we can make that case. We can publicize, you know, we are urging governments to do the things that some of what Joe Biden was trying to do, urge governments, and what some governments are doing, like China, is going all out on renewables. We can, any ways that we can support the climate justice movement, because the climate justice movement brings hope. One of the ways it brings hope is by identifying with the people who are most marginalized, the people who, and taking their lead, for instance, from Indigenous people, and looking at what some of the so-called solutions are being proposed by those at the top who are going to make money, and what the Indigenous people are saying, and the Indigenous Environmental Network, for instance, are saying about that. We have to become informed about, where are we supporting the people who are most vulnerable and who have direction to lead us, and where are we just staying with the dominant narrative, which is what's happening at the climate conferences. We're having a hard time there. So that's one thing, identifying with those who are impacted most. The other thing about the climate justice movement that brings hope is that it focuses on phasing out fossil fuels, which is what the scientists are all saying we have to do in order to curb emissions. We have to phase out fossil fuels, not just use them to supplement the new data centers and so on. We need to phase out fossil fuels. And one of the actions that we can take to move in that direction is to divest from fossil fuels as faith communities. Right now, there are institutions, organizations that have combined assets of over $42 trillion that have divested in some form from fossil fuels, and 35% of those are faith communities, not including my own, I confess. And that's why Fossil Free UMC is working on that. I'm the convener of that group. And so that's another reason, because they're calling for what has to actually happen based on the science. And so are the young people. That's part of a strong piece of the climate justice movement. It's not just marginalized people who are most impacted. It's frontline communities being polluted by fossil fuels. It's young people who are just trying to protect their future. It's people who understand what's going on with children and how badly they're impacted by both the air and so much harm by the current policies with fossil fuels and with climate change and other species, the biodiversity of the planet. So phasing out fossil fuels is a call. And another way that the climate justice movement is so powerful is that it is calling for system change, not climate change. You see that sign in rallies all the time and in marches, because that is one of the calls of the movement for climate justice that we can all be a part of. We can all identify with that movement. And then we're not just thinking as individuals that can't do anything. And so many people feel like they have, not you all probably, but people feel like they have to avoid the issue because there's nothing they can do. Not true. As Bill McKibben says, everything that has really been changed for the better, all of the positive changes we've seen, it's because we have a movement. And if we can build a movement, then we have a chance. And fortunately, that movement is already there. So there are plenty of other things, but I talk about, changing our ways of eating, and I talk about, switching to renewables. I just talk about all that in my book. But my hope is that we can build a movement. That's part of where my hope lies. And that is where I'll go next with my Zoom, with my, not Zoom, but with my PowerPoint, if that is if that's where we are. But I think there's more, I think there are comments.
Yeah, we have two comments that it would be good if you could address maybe
I see.
something about the idea of climate grief, maybe, or
Yes,
the idea, that the future is looking a little dismal and it's scary for young people like myself to think about having kids. Um, because of the future that they'll have. And just
yes.
how do we wrestle with that as people of faith? And then the other comment is just that a very clear comment that the economic system that we live under is built on extraction and endless consumption. And we live on a finite planet, so it just
Here
doesn't
we
work.
go. Yeah. And I think I'll address that first, and then we'll go to the other very, very powerful and important question. Our whole economic system is built on extraction and consumption. We need to live differently. And that's so true. And I do have more to say about this in the presentation. But that's what I'm talking about the system that we're in and why it needs transformation. And I will come back to that because faith communities have a big part to play because there is an ideology and a whole worldview that underlies that system of extraction and consumption, a whole worldview. And I think a lot of our faith communities might not think in these terms, but I think in these terms of we can have cultural conformity. We can model our faith communities around the culture. We can, try and make it work in ways that the culture makes it work. And, it's called cultural conformity. And I will address that later, but we also have a direction to point. Those of us in faith communities have a direction in which to point where there is what the whole slogan of the global justice movement, which is, part of climate justice movement is part of the global movement for the movement for global justice. Their slogan is another world is possible. And that's our message. Another world is possible. A world that isn't built on the values of status, wealth, and worldly power. There's another world that's possible. All our spiritual leaders have told us that, and that's part of our tradition. It's like we've got Christianity especially, and especially Western Christianity, has some really bad traditions and history. But there are people, even in Christianity and throughout the different faith traditions, that point toward a world of caring, a world of of love, where love is expressed, where concern for human beings are expressed, where concern for creation is expressed. And so we have a part to play, a big part to play, an important part to play in this struggle. So, and with the question, how can people build personal relationships and raise families with so dismal prospects for the future? I have a baby granddaughter, that great granddaughter that was born on December 4th. And so, and I have other grandchildren. And this question really strikes me deeply. And I'm glad. I want to feel the feelings. And that's and I think that the answer, there's no answer. There's no answer as far as what people are going to choose to do. I know people who are not planning to have children. I certainly know, and you probably do too. But how can we live in this time in a way that that can express love, that can even express joy, that can express appreciation for, like the book or the question that was asked, what we can love that the climate hasn't taken away, or something like that. I can't even remember. Please, if someone knows, post it in the chat. I've forgotten. But anyway, feelings coexist. You can feel grief at the same time you feel gratitude. You can feel sorrow, and even in memorial gatherings, there can be laughter. And I want those emotions to be available to myself so I know how I feel. But that's part of what happens with climate grief is people seize up. People become paralyzed. And there are a lot of reasons because, you know, even if we are trying to cut down our fossil fuel use, we can feel like hypocritical if we speak out against fossil fuels. But what's that about? There's so few choices left until now we're getting a lot of choices. But how do we do it? The way I do it is I integrate my feelings about the world, about the earth, about the cruelty in the streets. I integrate my everything that's going on socially and my commitments to social justice and to peace and to environmental justice and to climate justice. All of those commitments, I take them to the same place that I take my commitments, my personal commitments, my commitments to people I love, my commitments to teaching, my commitments to picking up my grandchildren and having them overnight, whatever I'm doing, so that I can be fully present. And so that I take them into my prayer life and ask specifically, what is it that my higher power, my the spirit, the one I call God, how am I being called? How am I being drawn? What am I being called to do today in this time? And what am I being called in an overall way to do? So that's what I suggest is incorporating it into the personal spirituality that helps you cope, helps me cope with everything. It's the same process. I do that with when I'm concerned about a loved one and I don't know if there's anything to do, or it's better if I just don't say anything. I incorporate that into, I incorporate my concerns about the world and the earth into that same process of prayer, and knowing that that feelings coexist. And I want to be. I think that as you go deeper into the spiritual life, You develop more of a capacity for feeling the joy and the sorrow. As far as what you're going to do about that, that's hard. That's a hard one. And that's why I think that it's important to be together, to not try and do this alone, to have a community of support, and it's particularly if you have a community of spiritual support of people who are like-minded. I think that's really important. Yeah, I see Denmark. Yeah, okay. Yeah, there's so much up there, so much that's so visible with what's going on with the administration that it's very engaging at times and hard. I would like to go back to the slideshow, not to the slideshow, but to the part after the slideshow, because I think I I need to move into my next part of the presentation, if that's okay. So I wanted to move us into the where we are with climate change, and I wanted everyone to be clear that we're really at the brink. And probably you all know that, but things have shifted a lot since 2023 and 2024 and 2025. So this book does help to have to approach climate change from the perspective of a faith. So I'm going to give you just a few takeaways. Climate change is our context. For some of us, for some people, it's background, because it's background, but it's the context for all the violence that's taking place. It's the context for the dissolution of democracy. It's the context for the breakdown of international law. And the system that brought us to this point. It's the context. And for some, climate change is foreground for people who are experiencing disaster, for people who are whose lands have been ruined, and so on. But it's going to move more and more into the foreground of our faith communities. And those of us who are aware might want to be ready, because a lot of people might not even be thinking about it in these terms. But as the planet warms up, there's going to be more and more time, money, other resources that are going to be required in order to address disaster relief, recovery, welcoming of climate refugees and resettling refugees, and trying to protect refugees, because the Department of Defense's plans on climate change are to do the same thing, but more intensely. And just to keep our own communities going, our own ministries going. So it's going to take some time, and that's we need to give it some thought. And Love in a Time of Climate Change offers some spiritual tools, a process of discernment, resources of faith to help us as faith communities meet this primary moral and spiritual challenge of our time. And the book reminds us that we're not alone, that that it's not, for one thing, it's not enough to, as Naomi Klein says, green the minutia of our lives, while big corporations and profiteers emit massive amounts of greenhouse gases. But we can join with others for support and action. And we can identify as part of the movement for climate justice and think how our actions contribute to this larger movement, which does offer hope to the world. Again, it calls for justice for those who are most vulnerable. It aligns with the science calling for a phase out of fossil fuels. It calls for system change, not climate change. And I want to say just a few more words about that, because I see we're coming up to the hour. The whole system in its foundational worldview is going to have to be transformed. The dominant system and worldview represent the opposite of what's called for in our faith traditions. Instead of the golden rule, those who have the gold get to rule because they have the power. Instead of honoring creation, the global system and the worldview behind it dishonor creation by turning the gifts of the earth into commodities to be bought and sold on extraction and consumption. Instead of establishing justice, the dominant system establishes and institutionalizes injustice instead of establishing justice. So our faith communities have a choice. We can culturally conform. We can go along with what Marcus Borg calls the normalcy of civilization. It's not a complimentary term the way he uses it, the normalcy of civilization. And the normalcy of it all seems to be going off the rails anyway. So maybe this is a good time to take a stronger stand. Or we can challenge the values that underlie the dominant system, the status, wealth, and worldly power. And we can point toward and demonstrate a way of living together that fosters both the well-being of human creation, and the well-being of human beings, honors creation, establishes justice. And in closing, we are privileged to be alive here on this incomparable planet in this moment of urgency when everything we have ever loved or will come to love is at stake. We're called to rise to the occasion, to face the truth, follow the light, and live into the future as children of the earth, children of the universe, children of God. And in closing, finally, I want to pass on to you the blessing that was given to me so long ago. I am grateful that we are alive at this time when the earth needs us most. Blessings to each of you. And I'm going to put a few things in the chat just before I go, because there's ways that you can be in touch with me or know more, get my book, get a free copy, and so on. So, okay.
Well, thank you so much for that presentation. That was wonderful and a beautiful closing. You wove it all together really nicely. So thank you. Please do drop that in the chat now so people can have it. We will have this. This has been recorded, so I'm going to post it on YouTube later today, and we will probably email it out as well. But you can find Sharon's work at her website. And then also, please feel free to reach out to me if you want to do anything at your congregation or host a webinar about climate justice or do anything of the sort. Let me know, and we'd be happy to assist you in making that happen. Thank you all so much for being here, and have a good rest of your day.